Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the radio show that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that when you bump into somebody on the street or you're at the grocery store and somebody starts telling you something that they heard on TMZ or something like that, you can debunk the information, or ABC, one of those alphabet soup news programs. They're so difficult to tell apart. You can find out more about us online at tertiumquids.org, or you can go to our YouTube channel under Freedom and Prosperity Radio and find archive footage of previous shows. And joining us now from the Heritage Foundation as Senior Fellow for Foreign and National Security Policy, Steve Bucci. Steve, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the show.
We wanted to tap into your expertise because I found one thing very shallow in this discussions over this summer of discontent. If anything, there's the alternate to the summer of love. It seems to be more people talking about using mental health as a reason to take people's rights away, but they don't talk about helping their issues. And then they talk about stopping mass shootings by, unfortunately, seemingly creating the scenarios by which we get more mass shootings. So let's go into finding holistic ways to do more to prevent these kind of horrific inhumanities that we seem to be doing more and more frequently, or at least we're more interested in covering in the newsrooms of America as they go on, Steve. So what are we missing? Why does it seem like we're going in contrary position to actually stopping more mass shootings?
Well, the main problem is there's a lot of different rights that are, sort of in conflict over these things. You have privacy rights under HIPAA and other federal regulations that prevent people from sharing information about those if they're in counseling or something like that. You have an inability of police to check some of this behavior until someone steps over the line and does a crime. So in this effort to prevent these horrible events, we've got to find a way to balance our constitutional rights, our constitutional freedoms. At the same time, we're adding some degree of protection to innocent people that are out there. It's a tough nut to crack, but it's not impossible.
One of the things that seems to be a tripping point is privacy. And it's interesting how many of the folks who are talking about common sense background checks also insist that as an employer in Virginia, I can't know more about a prospective hire rather more deeply than just did he tell me the right dates of previous employment in their records. So where is the balancing? Fourth Amendment very clear. The police do have a right to search your stuff, provided they show probable cause for it. Do we sign off on privacy to get safety, and then are we living out Ben Franklin's worst nightmare?
Well, I hope we don't have to go that far. I don't think we do. We do need to remember, though, that when someone makes a threat, whether it's on the internet, whether it's verbally, that's criminal behavior. That's not protected speech. And one of the things we need to do is get past the, frankly, social restriction of, when Steve Bucci makes a threat against his school, if he's a student, you don't sit there, well, I don't want poor little Stevie to get a black mark on his record, so I'm not going to tell anybody, or we're not going to do anything about it. It doesn't mean you have to kick in his door and, bludgeon him into submission, but somebody responsible, probably a couple of people, whether they be law enforcement, guidance counselors, school officials, parents, hopefully, need to intervene and find out, why did this young person make this threat? Why did they say that? Was it just blowing off steam, or is it an indicator of a potential danger coming down the road. Too often in these situations, we've had those signals and nobody did anything about it. So we do need to take action. That's really the first step, sort of pre-event actions that must be taken within constitutional boundaries, within the rights of the individual. But if they've said those words and there's evidence they have it either on their social media or multiple people have heard it, somebody needs to at least go chat with them.
It's interesting, analogous relationship between the very popularly shared story of the prison guards that were supposedly watching Epstein and have been found to have been sleeping through it. And I can extrapolate that out to many of the things that you're talking about, whether it's the kid in Parkland, Florida, who, the school had even banned from the facility over problems, but nobody wanted to do anything. And it seems like there are moments where it goes over the border from a cry for help, a warning flag, a saying, hey, I'm in trouble, where as a society, I think most of us want to help that person rather than just incarcerate them or take away any rights that they have. And that's sad to me that we're waiting so long out of some false narrative of caring when the real caring would have been intervening sooner.
That's absolutely right. You don't want a young man or a young woman to get a black mark on their record. Well, what kind of mark do they get on their record when they lose control, take a weapon, any kind of weapon, not just firearms, and go and attack someone or cause some horrific event? Not only have you let down that individual, because now that person is either gets shot by police, shoots themselves, or ends up in prison, and not to mention the other people you've let down because you failed to protect them from this potential threat. So you're right. We've got to take action. It needs to be reasoned. It needs to be within the bounds of constitutional authority and our protections. But we can do that and still protect people. And that's not going to stop everyone. But I got to tell you, if you look at the records, the vast majority of these events, there have been a multitude of warnings and signals given off before they occur.
When you look at it as an expert in national security and foreign security as well, are there places that do it better than we do? And, where is the borderline with our Bill of Rights versus the places that may do it better, Steve?
Well, the Israelis probably do it better than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And, they don't worry about profiling. That's a concept that they would be totally foreign to them. But they talk to everybody. So it's not like they're picking and choosing individuals because of their background or whatever. If you go in an Israeli airport, there are dozens of these very pleasant young people wearing blazers walking around chatting with everybody. And they'll come up, oh, sir, welcome to Israel. What's your business here? Oh, it's a business trip. I'm visiting with your government officials. Oh, that's very nice. Where are you going to be staying? And they ask you all these questions, to be honest with you, not even looking for the substance of the answer. They're looking for somebody who then displays suspicious behavior in the midst of that questioning that allows them to then say, well, we need to talk to you a little more. Here in America, if you do that, everybody cries foul, but that's a way to do it. At the doors of our schools and our churches, people should be chatting with folks as they come in. If they're doing something suspicious, if they're acting oddly, if they're wearing a big long coat in the middle of summer, you might want to stop them outside the door and say, hey,
how's it going?
Take that off before you come in.
Yeah. Can we take your code for you and see what the answer is? Steve, It seems so simple without violating, privacy rights that constitutionally, there was a mandate that we also look out for each other as these incidents unfold. And I think it was Vox.com had a headline after the Dayton shooting. The headline was "Debunking the Good Guy with a Gun Myth." And it wasn't 2 days later than one of the other Walmart incidents where the firefighter, I think it was in Oregon, no, this was the Minnesota one where the firefighter sees a fellow with a rifle strapped onto his back, takes out his licensed service revolver and says, "Stop right now and put that down and explain what's going on," which reinforces the fact that, even in Dayton, where the police were patrolling a busy restaurant nightclub area, it still took them 30 seconds to get to where the shooting was going on. Whereas if we're looking out for each other, we can be more immediate and in the moment when we see something about to go awry.
That's absolutely right. And in the midst of that, though, I would caution, we're not talking doing this cavalierly.
Oh, no. Not vigilantism.
Right. If you are going to play that role, if you are going to carry a firearm, you need to make sure you're trained, you've done all of the legal requirements, and you are ready to potentially have some repercussions on you if you act inappropriately. That said, it's not a myth. The good guy with a gun, we have thousands of those events a year. They're almost never covered at the national level. Sometimes they show up in local media, but almost never nationally. And the vast majority of people who own firearms, carry firearms concealed legally, never use them in an inappropriate or illegal way. They use them to protect themselves, their families, or in some cases, random strangers who are under some sort of threat. If done well and done correctly, as they always should, it is the most effective deterrent because it's right there. It's not 5 minutes away or 6 minutes away or even 30 seconds away. It's right there. And that sometimes makes a difference between a tragedy and a blip on the radar screen.
I want to talk about a social construct that I see, and I'm not sure if it's correlation or causation, but it seems like red flag laws, as also discussed in this, when they're brought up now, they're brought up as a pretext to take guns away, not get people mental health. But even in softer times, this discussion of see something, say something, often it has the opposite effect. It chills people's attempts to get the help they need because they're afraid of a permanent mark. Do we need to do a better job of transparency or the right of petition to get marks removed? Why does it always seem to run counter to what the intention is, which is to help people get help? They actually stop seeking it.
The main problem is a fear that other people are going to misuse that. If they find out that, your uncle has a gun and they don't like guns, so they say, well, I'm going to report my uncle. I think he acts crazy because after all, he owns a gun. Let's go report him and get it taken away from him. If you don't add in the proper due process, particularly due process in getting the thing resolved in a very timely and very efficient fashion, it can be a slippery slope down to something that, rather than helping society, just complicates it. When you throw that into the context of our social discourse right now, there are people who think anyone who owns a firearm is clearly crazy and irrational because who really needs that stuff? So they should have those taken away from them. That's not the purpose of these rules, and if they don't build in those protections, it will not have the effect we desire and will in fact cause an enormous backlash. So very potentially sticky set of situations with the red flag laws.
Well, and I guess couple that with the more thorough background checks, and I worry that a world where background checks are very thorough for buying firearms, they're talking about doing more in depth, that kind of thing. What kind of background check augmentation could the government do, Steve, in your view, that would help this, if any?
Well, I'm not a big fan of this because, a lot of it is based on the myth that we don't do background checks.
Right, exactly.
We do. They're very thorough. There is no such thing as a gun show loophole for background checks. They get on a computer and do a background check before they sell it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with online sales. That the weapon has to be transferred to a licensed firearm dealer who does the background check before the citizen gets it. The only place that gets thrown in there is, if I want to sell a firearm to my son, under some of the laws they're looking at, I'd have to go hire someone, somebody that the government designates as legitimate, to do a background check on my son before I could sell him a weapon or even leave it to him in my will. When you get to that level, I think that's problematic. That is, a little past government interference.
And the percentages.
We just need to make sure that people follow the rules, and if they find someone not following the rules that already exist today, then take action against them. But, we don't need a whole lot of new laws to deal with this.
When, and I'm thinking about Sandy Hook, where the young man had been on mental health medication and had stopped taking it. Is there any way, and I compared it a little bit, and I got some pushback from my listeners, compared it a little bit to being on parole from being in jail. And, of course, that immediately stigmatizes it and makes people not listen. So please hang in with me a moment. I want to ask Steve his thought on this. But if we let somebody out of prison and to put them on parole, their requirement is they check in, with a parole officer. If we're telling somebody you have mental issues and we could either institutionalize you or we have this medication, why is it unfair to ask that they check in with somebody once a week to make sure they're still taking their medications? Because some of these, it seems like they've just, with the phrase, gone off their meds.
Yeah, I mean, the whole mental health end of this, you run afoul. We used to have much more strict rules with people who were diagnosed with mental health issues. But in the 60s and 70s, we kind of threw all that in the trash cans and said, we're impinging on their rights. Right. The family can't institutionalize them. You have to just let them go. And frankly, we've done a disservice to those with mental health problems because they end up not getting the care they need to make them productive citizens. You're not, if you're on that kind of meds, you shouldn't be the one deciding whether you don't need to take them anymore.
Well, that's what I mean. Just say, why
crazy.
Can't we say them? You have to check in with a, don't even call it a parole officer. Just say you have to check in once a week to make sure you're still taking your meds. And it can be a positive where they can say, I don't know, it really gives me huge headaches, or it makes me very nauseous, or any of the other things, and maybe work out a better solution. But it seems like we're told, oh, well, that's what are you, treating them like a criminal? It's that or a mental health institution, which we say we're evolved past. But we've got to grapple with that part of it as well. And there's so many moving parts. I guess that's where it becomes difficult. And thank you for taking some time out with us in this longer form than a lot of the TV news magazines give it, because it's sound bites. And I fear that we're going to vote for something based on sound bites rather than deep dive into things that really help. Does that concern you?
It does, and what you're saying is exactly right. Before we vote for any of these laws, we need to, as citizens, dig into them and see what they really mean. Don't accept the soundbite. Don't accept the bumper sticker. We need to read into them ourselves and make sure they're not selling us a pig in a poke, or they're saying, "Oh, this will be fine. It's got all the protections in there." Make them prove to you as a voter and as a citizen that those protections are actually there, or you're going to end up with something that's going to make you decidedly unhappy and unsatisfied, and frankly probably won't solve the problem anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in New York. Bless the president for his positivism. He's always been Mr. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. But when he says we're going to come up with great background check laws, I just shake my head saying I don't know if he's talked this through, because I worry that he's talked himself into a corner where there's going to have to be some sort of background check laws. Otherwise, he'll be castigated on, see, Trump didn't get his background check laws, when it doesn't sound like really there could be better background check laws. What would you advise the president in this case, Steve?
I would advise him to go very slowly and to make sure that his legal advisors show him what is existing today and the extent to which they go, so that he is prepared to refute the news people or the political opponents who throw out nonsense against him, and so that whatever he comes up with is actually based in fact and law and reality, and not the fevered minds of people who have, frankly, underlying agendas.
Steve Bucci, Heritage Foundation, always a great resource, and read his stuff at the Daily Callers, the magazine that you can get online, heritage.org.
The Daily Signal.
Daily Signal, yes. I was mixing it up. I was all of a sudden trying to remember all these emails that I get. The Daily Signal, where you read so much of this stuff. Senior Fellow in Foreign and National Security Policy, heritage.org. Steve, thank you so much for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Again, find out more about us at tertiumquids.org. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute, until next week, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.